Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Well, I'm going to do something a little different in today's podcast episode, and I am going to answer some questions I received on Twitter. These all came from one person, and her name is Brenda Slomka. And I had posted something on Twitter, and then she responded with a set of 4 questions. And I looked at these questions, and if they're easy questions, I'll just answer them right away on Twitter. But these were a little deeper, and so I thought, I want to think on these for a little bit and then answer thoughtfully on the podcast. So here are the 4 questions, and then I'm just going to go in order and answer them accordingly. So the first one is, what are you learning about yourself as you read? The second one is, has your heart changed with these readings? The third one is, how has your view on this universe and humanity changed or expanded? And then the final one is, are there any readings which have shown views that have harmed us or entrenched harm? So those are the 4 questions. I'll just go over them in order here. And here we go with the first one. What are you learning about yourself as you read? Well, one of the biggest things is that I have an adventurous spirit, or a wanderlust of sorts. And I knew this, I've always enjoyed reading, but books for me are a way that I travel. And I used to travel internationally a lot for work. I still travel internationally and just around the States a little bit as well, not as much as in the past. But I find that books are a way for me to travel, and that reading scratches a very similar itch to traveling. And so I just think that's a neat thing. I mean, with reading, I used to post on Instagram the book I was reading, and for the location, I would put the location of the book I was in. So if it was taking place in Japan, I would put that I was in Japan, or if it was ancient Mesopotamia, I'd put in Mesopotamia or something like that. And I just like that idea of being transported somewhere in your mind as you're reading. So I sit in the same chair reading every day, and yet I'm traveling all over the world. And so that may seem silly, but it's just something I've learned that there is this kind of wanderlust in me, and reading can sate that wanderlust or that desire. Something else is that I've learned that I can learn that I can learn to like something that I previously didn't, just by changing my approach. And so the example that comes to mind is reading through Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings series, and starting out with The Hobbit. Now, these are books that I had never read in the whole series, and I was 40 years old at that point in the reading project, and I'm thinking to myself, like, I can't go much further in life without having read these books. Like, I just need to read them. And so I set aside 1 year to read through series. So I read like Harry Potter that year. I read Tolkien. I read Narnia. I read just these different sets of books. The Robert Caro series on Lyndon B. Johnson and some other ones as well. And when I came to the Lord of the Rings, I started with The Hobbit, and I just did not like it at all, but I really wanted to like it. And so I posted that on social media, and a friend of mine wrote back and he said, read it as if it's true. And so after The Hobbit, I started doing that with The Lord of the Rings. And so what that meant is there was a map in the back of the book. I pulled that map out, I set it down, and as I was reading The Lord of the Rings, I was looking at the map and treating it like a real place, and following where they were going, and just treating it like, these were real places on a real map. The other thing I did is just viewed these people as existing, that it wasn't just fiction. This wasn't just a fictional land, but that it was real. And I was reading about real people in real places. And yes, I'm suspending belief here while I'm doing this, but it had a huge impact, and I really began to enjoy the story. And that shocked me because just in general, fantasy works, things along those lines, I just have a lot of trouble reading them. I just can't get into them. And I think one of the biggest reasons is that I view it as silly in a way of, if I'm reading a book about World War II, I will be learning things that I can then apply to other books. Like I'll be gaining knowledge about Churchill or the German front or things that are going on in the Pacific. And then as I read other works on World War II, I can recall that information and just kind of builds on each other. But I would look at things like Lord of the Rings and this new world, like I'm learning all about this world that will not apply to anything else that I read. And it was just a poor way to look at it. But the thing that shocked me the most and that I learned about myself through that process is that just by doing something simple, like reading something as if it was true, I can learn to like something that I previously didn't like. And so I've tried that with different genres of books, or just, if I'm not into a certain book, just trying to change my approach to it or my way of thinking about it, and seeing if that can help me learn to like it. Another thing is that that I've learned about myself is that I can practice remembering what I read. And that also may sound silly, but in the past, I would read books and like a week later, I couldn't recall one thing from that book. So if somebody asked me, what was that book about? My mind would just go blank. And when I started this reading project, I didn't want that to be the case. And so I put into practice these different things and different practices just that help me to remember what I read. And so that could be as simple as underlining and marking up the book while I'm reading, something that I refused to do in the past. It might just be recapping the book when I've finished. But the biggest thing is this podcast and covering a book after I've read it and narrowing down my thoughts into a 30-minute episode. So these things, I've been able to practice that art of remembering and memory, and that has been something that I've learned about myself, that I can get better at these things, and that enhances the entire reading experience and reading project just by doing that. Another thing I've learned about myself is that I can lead others in reading, and that may sound like a simple statement or a strange thing to say, but I never pictured myself as being someone who would be able to discuss a book with others or even lead like a reading group on a particular book. It kind of goes back to that remembering what I would read, and always had trouble with that, and still do to many extents, but just this kind of fear of getting in front of people to talk about a book, and this fear of forgetting what the book was about, or a main point or a character or something like that. And but just learning that I can approach this as a way of teaching others, whether it's about a book or just the process of reading or getting into reading or choosing books to read. So that's been a neat discovery along the way. And the final thing here that I'm learning about myself as I read is just how much I love this. Again, I knew this going into this book project. I knew I loved to read. I'd experienced that as a young child, just the joy, and had lost that in high school and then regained it after college. But I just am continually amazed at how much I enjoy reading, how much I enjoy connecting ideas across books, and seeing different ideas pop up in different genres of books, different time periods, vastly different cultures and civilizations. And I just find that to be so exciting. So that concludes that part of what am I learning about myself as you read. Now, the next question is, has your heart changed with these readings? And this question made me a little uncomfortable. And the reason is that I think of this reading project as an intellectual endeavor, something that's taking place in my brain and not necessarily in my heart. But as I thought about this question more, here's what came to mind. Out of college, I had, I guess you could call it a sort of a crisis of faith. And there was this desire to kind of take a step back and look at the things that I believed and to make sure that they were true, that they weren't just something that was culturally based or something that someone with good intentions had told me, but that just may not be correct. And so I went through this process of not abandoning everything, but like just taking a step back in trying to look at things individually of what I had in my head. And the main reason I wanted to do this is I wanted to connect my head and my heart to the extent that I wanted to really believe the things that I believed. I didn't want them to just be in my head. I wanted them to be in my heart, and I wanted those things to be connected to the point where if I spoke about something, or if somebody asked me a question, like a deep question about my life, I didn't want that to come out of my head. I wanted it to come out of both places in the sense that it was a lived experience. And it was not just something I could spout off to sound smart, but it was something that I lived and I believed. And I could give examples in my life of that belief working itself out. And so that was a process I went through out of college. And I guess I'm still in that process with this reading group. So when I think about that question of, has your heart changed with these readings? Yeah, but I guess you'd have to ask my wife and those around me to get that to be fully answered. I am trying to get these books inside of me in the sense of remembering them, getting them to stick, trying to implement ideas into my life or new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching things. So to that extent, I am, when I think about it as that post-college thing of connecting the heart and the head, I do want that to take place. And so I am trying to do that just in the sense of those things being connected. I guess when I think about the heart, I think about emotions, I think about care for others or empathy. And I hope that's increased as I've read these books, especially novels or biographies, and reading about the experience of others. And so I think reading naturally helps you better understand these situations and ways to respond. But yeah, I guess the hope here would be that as I walk into a room, I can just better sense what's going on or what people are dealing with. And maybe even if somebody's telling me about something that an idea from a book may come up or a character from a book, and it just might give a little more insight into what is going on. So has your heart changed with these readings? Yes. I just have a really hard time answering that question. And to me, it's more a hope that there is a heart-mind connection that is changing me. Now, on to the third question. Has your view on the universe and humanity changed or expanded? Yes, and especially since I've started reading the immortal books, the great books, or the books of the canon, I've realized really quickly that humanity has not changed. You read something 4,000 years ago that was written 4,000 years ago, and you see very similar things to what are in my heart or what are in our hearts. And so in that sense, humanity has not changed. Technology has. And so, yeah, we've got phones in our pockets now, and, life is better with health and that kind of thing. But those two things get confused a lot of the times. And I think the main reason is we have a view that history is moving in a linear path, and it's up and forward. So it's getting better. We're getting smarter. We're getting rid of disease. We're adding these technologies that are helping things. But one thing I came across, and this was early in the reading project, and it came from a book called Generations by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And it presents a cyclical view of history, and it talks about it in the forms of there being 4 different generations, and these 4 different generations cycle. And so the generation may last roughly 20 years. And so you have these 80-year total periods, and they just repeat. And you can almost get a sense of what might happen in the future based on what has happened in the past, if it's a part of a certain cycle. And it's not perfect, the system and all that, but it was a very interesting way to read it. And I think just without having thought about it deeply in my life, I just kind of assumed that things were on a linear path, that things were moving in a particular direction. And, you just look at how much better lifespan, health, technology, and all that. But it's interesting to look at it in the different view of it being cyclical. And so for me, this was a big shift in thinking just on a view of history, as opposed to this straight line moving forward, just more of a circular path through history. So that was interesting. And then what that also, kind of thinking about the two first things I said about this question, it means that the newer stuff is not necessarily better. And if anything, it's worse. And that could be books, that could be ideas. There's great wisdom from the ancients. There's this idea of following the old paths. And the more I read of these things, they're addressing the deep questions of humankind. They're addressing them in a thoughtful way. We've gotten off course on so many different things. And so for even the great books, the immortal books I'm going through now, I'm not having anything in the last 50 years that was written in the last 50 years. We just need time to kind of sift through and see what's going to last. And so, yeah, again, a view on the universe, just that the newer stuff is not better, and actually could be much worse than what we have from the past. Another thing that has changed in my view on humanity or the universe is just that books are connected. And they're not just one-offs written by some genius that just, sits alone in his room and writes some crazy book that changes everything. That everything's connected, and it's connected in this great conversation. And so ideas that show up early on in Homer, they're taken on by the Greek tragedy writers. They are kind of massaging them. They're later picked up by Plato and Aristotle and the philosophers. And then you have Nietzsche writing about tragedy, and he's writing about Greek tragedy, and so he's referencing that. Or St. Augustine is writing his Confessions in the style of the Odyssey and in the framework of the Odyssey. And so there's this great conversation going on. All these books are connected. These ideas are connected. It just kind of connects all of humanity by looking at these books that are written across time. And it applies to the Bible. And this is probably my biggest shift in this reading project in terms of view on the universe and humanity. Is just, I guess, again, without consciously thinking about it in the past, I just kind of assumed the Bible sprouted up out of nowhere from nothing. And that it was the first thing, just even with the first words of the Bible in the beginning, just this idea that, this is the start of things. And one of my goals for this reading project was to see how the Bible influenced these other works that I was reading. But when I started reading the great books and started to see that a lot of the initial ones, as I was reading them in chronological order, had ideas that were found in the Bible. And so just take Gilgamesh and the flood deluge story there, written 1,000 years before the Hebrew Bible would have been compiled in Babylon during exile. And, what do you do with that? And I guess just a big shift for me of seeing the Bible was responding to these things. The writers of the Hebrew Bible, they were responding to these things in the cultural atmosphere, and perhaps giving another way to look at it. But just, it goes back to the idea that these books are connected. There's a great conversation going on. And it also applies to the Bible, that there were things that the Bible was referencing. There were things in culture and kind of saying like, hey, we know this is here. This is the the way that we are to view this. This is the way that we are going to consider the story or the way to live. But it was in reference to what was there as opposed to it just kind of sprouting from nothing. So those have been some of the biggest shifts in my view on the universe and humanity and how it's changed and expanded. Now to the final question, are there any readings which have shown views that have harmed us or entrenched harm? Well, a few come to mind. One is The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State by Friedrich Engels. And so Engels and Marx had a big impact on communism. And so from what I understand, I haven't read Marx yet. It'll be on the great books, the Immortal Books reading list, but I have not read Marx, but I did read Engels, and my understanding is that Marx is more on the political and economic side of things, whereas Engels is looking at it more on the societal point of what needs to happen for a communist state to move forward, and so a lot of things on family and kind of dismantling the family. And so just, views that have harmed us, I would say a lot of them are from that. And I think we're seeing a lot of the ramifications of those ideas in our day and age. A few others, Small Fry. This was by the daughter of Steve Jobs. And then the Steve Jobs biography. It disturbed me in just how poorly Steve Jobs treated his daughter. And then you read about Steve Jobs and he did some incredible things, obviously, with Apple and stuff, but like he really hurt a lot of people. And that was disturbing. So shown views that have harmed us, like just his view on life and amidst all this success, it was disturbing. And so I bring that one example up just because I would see that in other books as well. So whether it was biographies or novels, you see how someone's decisions can really harm people. And so just looking at the individual side of things of, how am I harming people, even my own kids and that sort of thing, by what I say or don't do or don't say or all that. So that's a view that has harmed Steve Jobs' daughter, and it harmed some of those around him. The last thing I just want to highlight is books that I've had trouble with in the sense of they put things in my head I don't want there. And that could be anything from Blood Meridian to Beloved by Toni Morrison to some of the Murakami books. Like I'm very careful with what I watch in terms of movies as well, because if I see an image, like it stays there and I don't want it to be there. And same with reading, these images come in my head of what I'm reading, and I don't want some of them to be there. Blood Meridian, I hated it the first time I read it, and mainly because of that, because it was putting things in my head I didn't want there. I later learned to love that book, but still there are things that I wish I hadn't read in that book that are still in my head. So that, in terms of any readings which have shown views that have harmed us or entrenched harm, just on the individual level, there are things that I try to avoid in what I read, just because I simply don't want it in my head. So yeah, there's ideas that are harmful. I do want to read about those, like on the Immortal Books level of books that have impacted society, and just to see how those ideas have spread across time, and maybe how they took an idea from the past and twisted it or took it in a direction that it just shouldn't have gone in. So I'm curious on that level, and then just wanted to answer that question more on the individual side of things as well. So those are the four questions and the answers I thought of for those. If you have other questions, send them my way. I'd love to do more of these kind of episodes. They're helpful to me too, just to kind of see how my thinking has changed amidst this reading project and the books that I've read. Sometimes I don't take that time to think about that. I'm just kind of moving along with the project. So it was nice to take a little step back here. So that'll do it for this episode. please remember that I'm running a reading group this year, and it's called Short Great Books. So you can jump in and out. You do not have to commit to a full year, but the only requirement is that you become a paid subscriber on my Substack. And it is super cheap. I have one plan that is $5 per month. And just for $5 per month, that gets you on the list to get the details for our monthly call. And so the next book that we are covering is Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass. That's going to be in February. That'll be mid-February. So look at the show notes. I'll have the details of what book is for what month this year. But I'm trying to keep the books to where they will take you between 2 and 5 hours to read. And then we'll have a 2-hour online discussion about those books. We did the Epic of Gilgamesh in January, and it was awesome. I loved it. And then if you live in the Franklin, Tennessee area, you can meet in person. We do that on Monday nights, and then the online version is on Wednesdays. So I'd love to have you join that. Again, it's a very small commitment in terms of time. You could do it along with whatever else you're reading. But if you've wanted to get into some short, great books, and just maybe didn't know where to start or how to go about it, this would be a great place for you to start. And then also just I'm on Substack, so if you get value out of this podcast and you want to return any of that value, I've got 3 different plans there on ways that you can support the podcast, and I would greatly appreciate that. That helps cover the cost of what I'm doing here. I'll be back next week with another episode, and not sure what that'll be yet, if it'll be covering a book or if I'll do another episode of something along these lines. But yeah, check back next week. And the book I'm reading right now is the Bible. So I start off each year just reading straight through a different version of the Bible. This year I'm doing the King James Version, and it's the one that is illustrated and designed by Barry Moser. So that has been a delight. I'll do an episode on the Bible, but just real quick, one thing I've noticed and really enjoyed about the illustrated version is that it's like I can better remember that character. So most of the illustrations Barry Moser has done are of characters, and it's or people who are in the Bible, and it might cause you to think about them in a different way. But I also have that visual of that person, and I love it. I found that it's really helped me to better remember that person. So, yeah, that's been fun. You can follow me on Instagram or Twitter or on the website, and those are all just search for Books of Titans. So until next week, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.